How is it for artists and galleries and artist-run spaces and that kind of thing in Phoenix as opposed to Los Angeles, which is getting increasingly kind of expensive, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, we have, you can obviously live here much cheaper.
Yeah.
We have a strong museum system. Our middle range galleries, there's not as many of them, but we've had some vanish and some pop back up, the regular sort of cycle. We have obviously less big galleries. We only have a few in town at all. And the artist-run spaces are kind of scattered throughout the valley. But we're also experiencing the shift to online sales, the shift to more art selling being done by different means. We have a model in town here that's really working with the city and public projects and businesses to supply them with artwork around the town. We and also work with developers. So our market in the short time I've been here shifted more with more emphasis on that, and I think that's just everywhere. I think that's ubiquitous. You know, the great shift was that nobody thought anyone would really buy art online, sight unseen. And it turns out it's the exact opposite of that. It was everyone who's sort of either middle or class or below this, like who would ever spend that much money on a luxury item that they haven't seen in person. But in fact, when it's like something to enrich your life or enrich your aesthetic sensibilities or whatever, where you live, people love that, and they actually find galleries sometimes a bit isolating, a bit alienating. So the majority of sales now are online. And it was just, it was one of those things that people didn't really think would happen. I think it's still great to have a brick and mortar where people can come, see things, and interact and get to know stuff. But for your buyers across the nation or across the world that you're missing out on by just sticking to an old model is now, completely silly. So that I think we've just undergone the same shift that everyone else has, which is realizing like art is this thing that the more you get out there, the more venues you need to disseminate it, and most of those in real time. Most of them have to come up. We've got a place here in town called Tempe Digital that you can just buy with a click, and it's delivered, and it works very well. It works. I mean, you wouldn't think that it would work that well, but the images look great. The product is great, and there you have it. It's a functioning model selling art. So yeah.
Just go back to something that you said earlier about abstraction and the general idea that is conservative kind of thing.
Right.
How do you see because this is something I've been talking with recently with other artists as well. How do you see the interaction with aesthetics and maybe particularly with abstraction and politics?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, abstraction is a genre that sort of held for the whole of the 20th century, right? It started in a bunch of different places. There was abstraction that came out of constructivism that was very political. There was stuff that came out of more the symbolists and Kandinsky that was more spiritual. There's an abstraction that was more about primary forms and essentialism and sort of rhetoric of purity, which was really a kind of an almost industrial model of art. Very branded in a way, and it sort of proliferated out from there, right? From all sorts of schools, from Abex to neo-concretism to neo-geo and hard edge abstraction and minimalist abstraction. And so you had like a school of abstraction almost every decade, and it was, along with other schools of art, probably one of the defining genres of the 20th century in the sense that culture has become increasingly abstract, right? Capital is abstract. So just that fact gave it this life, that we were always looking at a world of more and more distance, more and more mediation, which is ultimately a world of more and more abstraction. And then it kind of hit a tough wall in the early 21st century with what people called zombie formalism, right? And this is really like the production of a market that we now all inhabit, where kids are enrolled to go get their MFAs, often at very expensive schools, top tier schools that come out with a ton of debt. And they got more focused on doing a trick that you hadn't seen with the material before,
right?
Than on really having something to say.
Yeah.
But also with having all of these schools of abstraction, it's getting harder to say something in that medium. And sometimes they do run aground. Sometimes things do run out of steam. Usually some other generation comes and picks them up and finds something to renew, but there's these gaps, you know. There's like a sort of slowing down period, if you will. And I think with so much that was written about that and a lot of the prices falling around the group of artists that was involved in that phenomenon rapidly, it was one of the largest losses of value that anyone could sort of codify in the art world and point to it and say, like, they were all at this place in the auction house and now they're all at this place, and that loss of value is dramatic. So it was like one of our first identifiable bubbles. Like we were like, it's an art bubble. And there's been other ones, but this was really crouched in market terms strictly. There's been people say, oh, you know, neo-expressionism, that's just not valuable. That's not an interesting thing that's going on there. But it still did fine in the market. It didn't, you know, Basquiat and Keith Haring, it didn't lose value. People had a critique of it, but it didn't, you know, they're as canonized as anyone in the world today. Will the people in zombie formalism end up in that same fate? Probably not. Although there are like 4 or 5 out of the whole group that have kind of held on, but it's the first time that movement or a moment of abstraction happened as a non-moment. They weren't a school. They're known for basically not having succeeded, which is a weird inversion of the paradigm. Every other school is known for having succeeded at something. They're known for not having succeeded at something. So that comes into politics, and that I think all these things, unless they take up a certain purchase in the critical moment that they're in, you know, a lot of the dominant discourses of this era have been sort of revolved around object-oriented ontology, discussions of the Anthropocene, accelerationism, right? All of these. There's been actually a mounting proliferation of manifestos in the early 21st century, all addressing radically new ideas for art production. And abstraction struggled to get its ground in that. But I think the political aspect of art comes in where all of those new manifestos, those new camps in art are digging into things that are the burning concerns of the time, which has always been what great art production is about, at least throughout the 20th century, and well into the 21st. But that's where they really meet up, you know. Critical thought and critical production have to kind of marry, and any time that aesthetic separates itself out from being concerned really with anything in the world, becomes a kind of art for art's sake sort of proposition. It may already sort of be doomed to kind of irrelevance in the long run, I think. So that's my short take on that one.
That's great. Talking there about the market as well, I always find myself, I'm just on my way here, I stopped in at there was Sydney Contemporary Art Fair.
Okay, yeah.
And, you know, art fairs I find to be a bit of a weird kind of thing. To me, they feel like a trade fair.
Right, yes.
Because, you know, cubicles, you know, different galleries, different commercial entities kind of all selling their wares. And I always feel like, as a theorist and a writer, that it's almost like it's outside of, you know, my patch in a way. Right. What do you think about the way that, let me ask this differently. Do you think that criticality kind of has a place where the market has such a dominance at the moment in what people often consider to be good art?
Right. I would hope so. I think there's been, like, especially this last, I don't know, 3 or 4 months, there's been a whole bunch of these, like, either galleries closing or galleries confessionals as they close about the status of their business, about what they think about art fairs, about what they think about the market at this time. And they've all been really interesting. They've all been people in that moment where they have nothing to lose by what they're saying because they're exiting. And I think there is some trouble in the art market in the sense that people know too many fairs came out. You know, like Art Basel, when it was really relevant, you could go there and it wasn't a fair, but it was a world picture. Like, you went there and everything from the world was in there. You could see what the concerns were. As much as Venice Biennial or Documenta or Manifesta, it was on par with that. And now with, like, LA even got super saturated with art fairs, like 2025 at some point. And none making any greater impact. And now a lot of the art fairs have scaled back, closed, withdrawn a bit. And artists even have to be a little suspicious of them. I've seen more and more things coming out from the fairs, petitioning grad students to do pay-to-play events that they supposedly win and are juried, and then at the last minute there's asking for a bunch of money and this kind of thing. And I think something that all these art dealers that have retired or gotten out of it, their complaint at the end wasn't so much with the market or commercialism or anything else, was just that the kind of art that they got in to support didn't exist anymore. And I think that's a real moment where you have to step back and take a critical measure, because they were investing their lives, their time, their money, and stuff they really believed in. And they didn't really necessarily blame the market that much. They really said there isn't the kind of committed production that I want to keep working with. And I do understand why the market is having a hard time. Because at the end of the day, you can't actually sell stuff that isn't interesting that long. It will implode on itself. And it's a hard thing to talk about with artists versus critics versus gallerists versus institutions. Why this moment now? Why these closings? Like, why isn't the brick and mortar model working? Why is there so many complaints about it? Because it involves a whole reassessment, actually, of what we're educating people to do. Because they go out in the market, and if it's not relevant, if it's not making an impact somewhere, eventually it's not going to make an impact anywhere. So I think this is a time where those things are coming back into view for a generation. I'm just kind of asking, like, where did my gallery go? Where's my representation at? Like, and it usually leads to more to questions about, well, what am I doing? And what do I need to do differently? And that kind of takes a little time. But that's where I think, for me, it's been a slow sort of shift. It's more like a downshift in a car when you're like in third and drop in a second or something. It's not like a big change. But I think someone could make a study just of these art world confessionals that have been coming out, like, you know, and like have the dealers do, you know, kind of what's that when they had like the confessional room on reality TV, like, this is what really happened with my gallery. But I moved here from LA because I thought the costs were too high for gallerists at that time, and I didn't see a sustainable model. But I could come here and buy my buildings outright. And have very, very low overhead and be sustainable forever. Whether things sold, didn't sold, whatever. I could maintain being interested in the kind of art I wanted to promote, regardless of market influence. And then that ends up actually being more interesting. So it's a kind of paradox. Like, you've got to find a model that's sustainable and still be critical, and that will actually get you market success if you can hold them all together. And if you can't, if you lose one, if you don't have a sustainable model, if you don't have critical production, you know, and it's not making impact, you lose the whole thing. It's like I don't know, something that just topples over if you don't have all those pillars in place. But it's a big change. You know, it's a big change. I think galleries that are more mobile, more smaller, but with larger means to disseminate art, are going to do better. But sustainability is really the long-term thing, I think, in the gallery game.
Well, thank you very much, Curtin. It's a pleasure meeting you today.